I read some articles who say that the problem of the AfD and the right-wing uprising is that they are emotionalizing some problems. And I think this is a wrong analysis.
The whole narrative of the revolution being incomplete or having been cut short wasn't given a space either. The AfD could go around and put up billboards saying complete the revolution, which should have been a left-wing project, but it's been taken over by the right.
You're listening to This Authoritarian Life, a podcast in which we explore everyday human stories to make sense of authoritarian politics. My name is Kristóf Szombati.
And I'm Erdem Evren. This episode was sponsored by the Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung and was produced in cooperation with the International Research Group on Authoritarianism and Counter-Strategies. In the last episode, we focused on space in the context of the Hungarian countryside to be able to make sense of the origins of authoritarianism. In this episode, we'll focus more on time in the context of East Germany, thinking the past and the present and the relations between the two. In recent months, the far-right authoritarian nationalist AfD, Alternative for Germany, made unprecedented gains in the state elections in the former eastern provinces in Germany. More recently, Germany celebrated the 35th anniversary of the Wende, or the turning point in English, that refers to the regime change in 1989-1990. The end of the German Democratic Republic and its unification with West Germany is to this day narrated in the mainstream media and politics as a happy end. We therefore want to connect the past and future by asking, how does the past continue to figure in the present, and what kind of power does it exercise over the present?
Counterintuitively, we'll start with the present. But before we jump in, I'll let Erdem introduce our two guests, or the first one at least.
So we have two guests who are both from East Germany and who both work as artists. Despite this common background, they also come from different generations, one of them being born in 1974, the other just before the fall of the Berlin Wall. So our first guest is Elske Rosenfeld. Elske is an artist and author living in Berlin, although she grew up in Halle. The primary focus and material for her artistic production are the histories of state socialism, its dissidences, and the revolution of 1989-90. Her ongoing project, The Vocabulary of Revolutionary Gestures, investigates how political events manifest and come to be archived in the bodies of their protagonists. Welcome to This Authoritarian Life, Elske.
Hi.
And I'll introduce Anna. So we also have Anna Stiede. You were born a bit later than Elske, I think 1987, if I remember correctly, also on the east side of the wall, so to speak, in Jena. You also trained as a communication trainer, but you're primarily really a performance artist. You're a performer. And you're associated with a theater collective called 𝐒𝐭𝐤𝐬𝐤𝐞𝐝. And your artistic work, to me, it seems like it focuses very strongly on the body as a container of experience, which can be investigated to learn about the ways in which the past conditions us, influences us. And most recently, you have been going around East Germany with a particular performance focusing on complaint, which I think is a great entry point for this discussion. And before we jump into it, I just want to play maybe 20 seconds from one of your rehearsals for this performance. So here's the extract.
Ist doch Kacke, könnt ihr da ein bisschen näher kommen oder was? Der Job ist auch weg. Das Clubhaus zu. Alles Baustellen überall.
So, of course, it goes on for 20 minutes. But can you tell us what you're saying here and what you're doing in the performance?
Yeah, so thank you. I can identify with what you were saying about my work. And this is a character. It's called Anna Medea, this character. And it's complaining, but maybe it's better the word mourning or to bellyache or to gamble. I was doing a research about English translation for meckern or schimpfen. And Anna Medea is grumbling or bellyaching about what is going wrong, what went wrong in the past, like that the clubhouse is closed, that there's again a change of everything. There's again money changing. There's no job anymore. There is no bakery anymore. There are no buses bringing you to the bigger city. And Anna Medea is talking like that for 10 or 15 minutes. And so I was interested in creating something like a Wutbürgerin, like an angry citizen. Because there was a picture, that I don't know how it was for you, Elske, but for me, there was a strong figure when I was growing up, and it was a Jammer-Ossi.
Mm-hmm.
And this
like
was
a complaining Easterner, right?
Yeah, East German people complaining. Mm-hmm. And this was for over 30 years a degradation of political expression, I have to say. So I was interested in the last years to do a research about this, what's going on when people are grumbling, and maybe what we can find out also if we make it bigger, this grumbling, if there are not maybe also some desires or wishes inside.
So where did Anna Medea go? Which places in East Germany did Anna Medea visit, and when?
Yeah, so you played something out of a rehearsal that I did in February in front of the Bahnhof, East Bahnhof here in Berlin. And then I went to Gera, what is in Thuringia, in May. And there I founded also a choir of grumbling people with other colleagues and artists. And there we did a performance in front of the theater, because you have to know that in Gera every Monday, there are right-wing people doing a demonstration in Gera, and they end up in front of the theater. So for me, it was a big and an important chance to take the square and to try to override also this square. And then after Gera, we went to Erfurt we were invited from the Phoenix Theater Festival in Erfurt Nord.
Also in Thuringia.
Then we went over to Dresden.
Which is Saxony.
There we were in the center. It was a really difficult square for me, because this is a square where the Pegida demonstrations, the big right-wing demonstrations in 2014-15 started.
Against Muslim immigration primarily.
Exactly. We had a rehearsal time in between in a small village in the forests of Thuringia in Mötzelbach. This was really nice, where we were rehearsing 3 days together. And then we went over to Halle. Which is in
Sachsen-Anhalt, another region of East Germany.
Yeah, and now we will go over to Suhl in Thuringia and Gotha and Eisenach. In the beginning of December, we will continue our tour. Yeah.
So tell us, sorry.
No, I was going to ask the same thing. So, what kind of people did you meet during these performances? And, what were some of the strongest experiences?
Can I just clarify, because I think we forgot to mention, which is important apart from the name of the places, is that you always went to public spaces.
Ah, yeah, that's true.
So It's not in a theater, it's not in any kind of institution, but maybe you can even speak about the kind of places. I only saw you in Halle Neustadt, and the space was very specific. But yeah, just to bring that in, because I think it's important to answer Erdem's questions with that in mind.
Yeah, that's true. Because, of course, I like theaters, but I'm also really interested in the public squares and public spaces. So for me, it was important that Anna Medea and now the choir also took some space in public areas. So in Erfurt and in Halle, it was a specific barrio of, how do you call Plattenbau?
The prefab housing estate,
Yeah. So
estate, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, for example, in Halle Neustadt during the GDR, there were living 94,000 people, and now there are like 45,000 people. So you can imagine that there's so much emptiness also there in this barrio, and it's a little bit the same in Erfurt Nord. You feel that there was more life, and you and there are many supermarkets, many construction areas. There's a lot of beton everywhere, and I'm playing, and I try to catch the people that are walking by, who want to go shopping, who want to get their children from the kindergarten. So it's a coincidence.
Anna used the term GDR. That'll come back, and I think in the discussion, it's the German Democratic Republic from not before 1990. So there's just very little life, is my sense, often in these spaces. And maybe that has changed over the past years. We can talk about that. But what are these encounters like? Like, what's your strongest experience of encounter you had in one of these cities, maybe?
Yeah, because it's true, the squares look like empty, but still there are many people. So there are people living, and you just have you have something to consume there. You can go shopping, but there's no nothing. Yeah, there's no possibility to come together or to create something. So I was interested to offer something or to open a space and invite people to put some life in the squares. I just opened the space and invited them to talk about what they don't like in their actual situation. So Anna Medea is always repeating, "Ist doch Kacke," like, this is shitty, and it's repeating it, and at a certain point also asking the people there, what do you don't like? And then sometimes people are like shaking their heads that they agree with what Anna Medea is saying, and sometimes they put also words inside what they are missing, like it's shitty that the tickets for the public services are so expensive. It's shitty that here's no swimming pool anymore. It's shitty that we don't have a place for teenagers to come together anymore. It was really interesting that people took part in it and resonated to this offer. And I think what was really interesting for me is that they took part even if they didn't know me or even if they didn't know the other peoples around. So this was also really interesting for me, that we don't have spaces anymore where we debate in the public with people who are strangers to us. So
right.
Like, two things come to my mind from what you just said. Like, on the one hand, it sounds as if people are expressing their feelings of desperation and deprivation, that some of the social services, some of the facilities, some of the infrastructures that they used to have do not exist anymore, and they are basically complaining about this, is what I understand. And the second interesting thing is that people just want to be heard, and people just want to speak, I guess. They just also want to voice these grievances, these resentments, these things that affect their lives, basically. I think this is the reason why this Anna Medea works so well, actually.
Yeah, it's true. There are a lot of people who really need to talk. Like, this is my general impression.
Yeah, I totally share that. And it's weird because there has been a lot more talk about East German experiences in the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years. When I started working and doing events, I had this feeling that there was this bottomless well of, like, almost pressure cooked experience that hasn't been expressed publicly. So I think what you're doing, and other people are doing it in similar ways, is just to sort of give a space for these sentiments to be heard, is so important. And I'm really fascinated that it's still going on. And there's always this sort of idea that it should be enough. And now we've spoken enough about East Germany. This starts 5 minutes after they've started talking to East Germans. But there is this really strong sense of the need to express yourself in public. And it's this fantastic offer that you pick up on, to take this as an offer of people to say, we are here and we're prepared to speak to you. And you're creating this space, and also so you're making an offer, but also the people coming and responding to you are responding to that offer and also being generous. So I think that's what's so nice about your project, is that it sort of takes this collective urge to speak, and it gives it space.
So what is behind this urge, and what are the emotions that haven't been expressed or are still looking for an avenue?
So I think it is fear. It's fear of social insecurity. Because I really felt that people are really, really unsatisfied. People are stressed of old age poverty because they do not have so much Renten points.
Pension?
Just
pension.
credits.
They don't have so much pension credits as maybe people in Western Germany. So there's a lot of fear. I think there's also sadness, because it's interesting what you said, Elske, that maybe you think, it's enough now, and you don't have to talk about this East German problems. But no, there is still a lot of energy, and that needs to be expressed. And I always say, I think there's still a lot of sadness because there was no funeral of the GDR. There was no ritual that said bye-bye to the GDR. And I think this is a big thing. So I really feel always also kind of a sadness. And what was interesting with Ana Medea, I found also out that to bellyache and to talk about subjectivity in this Eastern German context is a kind of digestion. So it's important that there is still a need of digest this transformation in a way. And this was interesting for me because this ist doch Kacke works with a strong k, which comes from the
belly,
diaphragm,
diaphragm,
from the diaphragm. And so I found it out. It's kind of a digestion. Also, it's also an offer of to digest collectively and not individually at home.
So how come it's, I'm just wondering, how come that we're 30 years down the line? 35 to be precise, thank you, and the digestion is still ongoing. So do you have an idea of why that can be?
Maybe to add to that, like, what sort of an experience was the unification or the end of the GDR that, people still feel that that process somehow was not complete, or as you said, that they didn't properly bury the East German state, basically. And also, what were your experiences, personal experiences of the unification and its aftermath? I mean, you were born in 1987, right?
True, yeah. And I was born in Jena, and it's a big question. My personal experience, like, I think I started also my work with GDR in Eastern Germany a lot with also through the work that like colleagues like Elske made years before, and then I started to do more research about people who were in the opposition in the GDR, and then at a certain point I realized it's not my GDR. I was just looking so much on the experiences of other people in GDR, then I looked more to my mother and what was a connection to my mother with the fall of the wall, and I think I'm really shaped by the experience of my family, that my grandparents lost their jobs because the Treuhand liquidated all the.
So this was an agency that was responsible for actually restructuring state-owned capital and then ended up privatizing a lot of it.
Exactly, and they were also responsible for the disposal and scrapping of the machines, what is really important for my work because I have a strong connection to machines, and so I'm shaped of that from the from my family that people lost their jobs, and from kind of a depression which was normal. Like, I grew up in a smaller village near Apolda. Apolda was a city which was famous for textile industry, and it was just really depressing, and everything was gray, and there was many people with alcohol addictions around, and I always say it's like in the Anne Clark's Sleeper in Metropolis. This is a song what is my 90s in Apolda. I don't know, this describes really good this atmosphere.
Can we translate that? That's difficult, right? Or can you say it
Sleeper
again?
in Metropolis.
Sleeper in Metropolis is a song from Anne Clark.
Yeah.
Anne Clark.
Yeah, Anne Clark.
She was for some reason big in East Germany in the 80s and 90s. She's not so well known in the UK, which is actually hilarious because she is British. But she was the first concert I went to after the wall came down. So maybe that's also a vendor memory.
Really?
Yeah. I won a ticket in the local newspaper. There was like a competition, and I won it. It was great, fantastic.
Where was that?
At the Schore in Halle, which doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down. But,
So why was she big?
I don't know. It was this kind of sort of dark electro that I guess took off in Germany in a big way, without going too much into the music history now. But I think, for some reason, maybe it is interesting to think about the psychology of that, why it was popular. And I'm not sure I'm not sure if it was an East German thing either, or if it was East and West at the time. I experienced this in East Germany, but that would be an interesting study for someone to do, right?
Yeah, interesting, because I was thinking maybe it was for the reason of deindustrialization. So that is a sound, for me it's a sound of deindustrialization.
Which of course, happened in the UK before it happened
exactly
in East Germany.
Did it also express this darkness that you were saying, or the grayness, or the loss, or?
I mean, I think Anne Clark for my generation was also a positive figure, despite the darkness, because she was a West, but a different West from the West we were being presented in the Reunification, which was this sort of conservative idea of the liberal West as kind of the redemption of the revolution and of our biggest hopes and dreams, which it obviously wasn't. So there was a big fascination with this kind of Western underground cultures. From the UK, also a bit earlier in the 80s. Maybe this is going too far away from our subject, but for example, like Black American culture was huge when this film came out. Beat Street, a film produced by Harry Belafonte. A lot of people my generation say to this day that this was for them a kind of predecessor of the Wende, this kind of feeling of suddenly having a voice, because and this happened through identifying with black kids in New York. So there's also something interesting there. But maybe should I answer that question about the Wende as well, because I think it's so interesting how different generations respond to it. And we did talk about it a little bit through Anne Clark now, but just to say that so my experience of the Wende is a sort of malleable term, but if we speak about it in the more narrow sense of the kind of changes of 89, 90, then yes, I experienced that as a 15-year-old, and this sort of depression that Anna mentioned, I think for me the most important or formative experience was the experience of this kind of turnover, this emotional turnover from this moment of self-enfranchisement, when suddenly you have the feeling that you can decide together with other people, talk about really the fundamentals of collective life, how do you want to live. I experienced this at school. So we were talking to school teachers, for example, that had been in the party, and they were coming to us, and we were talking about what does it mean to have been part of the system, and how do we deal with this now, and how do we take this forward. And especially at the school, this was interesting, right? How can you think of a school without discipline, for example, in the traditional sense? All these questions came up. So there was this immense sense of empowerment, and it sort of broke off really quickly and really dramatically with this turnover towards the unification narrative. And for me, this kind of depression that Anna describes set in with this turnover to the unification, which is weird because it's on one level it sort of seems to be the thing that people voted for and wanted, and we can talk about that more later if we want to go into more detail. But the sense of disappointment and disillusionment that Anna mentions, and that was the kind of emotional soundtrack of your childhood, began actually with this event of the unification, which is being sold to us to this day as this happy ending of the revolution. And yeah, especially for my generation, who were very hopeful about this kind of self-democratization and self-enfranchisement, I think it was a big shock to the system to then be told, well, actually what the new system told us was, it was like Thatcher's there is no alternative, right? This was a neoliberal sort of dictum that came in immediately after the revolution. You're being told by the new system, which has sold itself as the democracy, the perfect democracy, or the greatest possible democracy that we have, comes in and then tells you, well, actually, there is no space for political discussion because there's economic �Κ𝐧𝐬𝐤𝐞, like the economic necessity. So the Treuhand is an economic necessity, and there's no democratic leeway for decision-making anyway. So you go from this immense upswing of decision-making, collective debate, to this absolute disenfranchisement of neoliberalism. And that, for me, is the experience of 1990.
So, and what did you do with this disappointment that on the one hand it was such an empowering moment in the beginning, and then there was this big disappointment of that there is just a neoliberal reunification? Because I was wondering also, how is it possible that today we have these energies of fear and hate and angriness, which has to do maybe with this disappointment, but why it was not possible to heal this disappointment?
Well, how do you heal this kind of disappointment? I think you have to make it productive, and that's what people, I think, like you and me, are still trying to do in an abstract way. But yeah, I don't know if we want to go into sort of the Wende, because that was more for your second part of
we should because this shift from euphoria to disappointment is important to talk a bit more about it. How fast did that come about?
It happened so quickly. I mean, the demonstrations essentially turned from pro-freedom, first of all, demonstrations against the East German regime, then were the demonstrations that took more this sort of nationalist direction in some ways. But then in parallel, already in early 1990 and from 1991 for sure, the demonstrations continued, the so-called Monday demonstrations, and became about these political and economic grievances about the privatization and the loss of jobs. So this sort of protest essentially continued. So it's also sort of wrong to say that the revolution ended with the unification. It continued. So the sort of politicization of the population, I think, continued for much longer than it's sort of historically accounted for in the story of the happy unification.
I mean, there were many strikes, right?
There were hundreds of strikes. Hundreds. For the first 4 years after unification, there was a massive strike wave. And that's where the interesting thing, this figure of the Jammer-Ossi became so important, because it was a way... It came up almost immediately, this sort of construction of the East German as the perpetual, on the one hand, unpolitical, undemocratic, and at the same time perpetually complaining person. And this was a very clever way of disavowing and actually making it unreadable, this kind of discontent that was going on and that was feeding into this mass protest movement of the early 90s, which to me is a clear continuation of the revolution, but is not generally considered as that.
So there was a stigmatization.
There was a stigmatization,
of
and the terrible and the sad and horrible thing is that East German discontent started being noticed when it turned right wing.
Exactly,
and which is now 10 years ago, Pegida, and since then we have a discussion about East German grievances that is not just dismissing East German grievances as something odd or stupid or pathological, I mean, just to to bring in this nice story of the psychological manual of psychological diseases, they made a disease out of it. There's in the International Manual of Psychological Diseases, there's something called the post-traumatic embitterment syndrome, which was a phrase and a term coined by a West Berliner psychotherapist who created this condition, so that discontent was not only negated, it was also pathologized. And now it comes out in this right-wing form,
Right.
unfortunately.
But there's a puzzle here, just stepping back a bit, because so the Wende was characterized by a major loss of mostly industrial jobs, right? Like your family, Anna, seems to have been impacted. But then if we go back or forward in time, and especially nowadays, everyone says Brandenburg is actually not doing so badly economically. There's all this investment coming, and people actually have more money to spend than they used to. So how does that come together with still this disappointment that both of you have recognized and your work deals with?
And if I may add something else, so in places like Brandenburg or Thuringia, it's not only people in their 40s, 50s, 60s who actually vote for AfD. I mean, it's actually young people who seem to be kind of supporting AfD or other right-wing, far-right groups. And many of these people haven't even experienced the Wende, actually, of these young people. So, like, what is this exactly? Is it some kind of generationally transmitted trauma, sadness, depression, or something else?
Yeah, I would say there's something like a transmission through generations, because I was also shocked by the votes and realizing that, okay, the people with whom I was going to school, like every third person is voting for AfD. And why are they doing that? And then I realized, okay, yeah, we were all shaped by this transformation. And so I think there is a big power of we don't want to come back in the situation where our parents or our grandparents were in, something like that. And there is also, I don't know what do you think about this, Elske? But I think there's also a strong thing of for 30 years or 35 years no one listened to us. They called us Jammer Ossi. They did not take us political seriously. And now we are very, very strong, and there is a strong positive process of identification with the East and with Eastern Germany and with with symbols of the GDR, with the car, with the Trabi, and there is a kind of nostalgic identification with the East or Eastern German. What has something to do also with in Germany you call it Trotz, like there's something. How do you call it in English? Like this emotion of
grudge or no?
No, I can't think of the word right now. It's more this kind of like, I do it anyway.
Yeah,
I do it to show you. What's the word?
It's something like it's a childish way, I would say.
Yeah.
For example, Dirk Oschmann, this professor, wrote this book about the East is a invention of the West. And I think this book was really the best example for that, like empowering a kind of, I would say, childish identification with the East. And I don't know how to explain it another way.
It's kind of this, like this opposition, but this childish opposition.
Yeah,
if you say yes, I'll say no, right?
Yeah. And something,
is it that?
It's sort of it's just performing the Jammer Ossi in a way. So the Jammer Ossi is, in that sense, not a one-way ascription or street. It's also being performed in the debate that we see right now. this kind of like, I don't care what you think.
Exactly.
Well, it's an answer to the stigma, to being stigmatized. So it's like, I'll take the stigma, I'll put it on my head, and then I'll give you what you deserve, kind of, from that position.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think something like that happened. And it's not really interested in the world or something. It's like really close. It's really it's a closing performance. It's not really a thing. But yeah.
But the fuel of that is discontent, right? It reminds me very much of Trumpism in the U.S., of what's driving that. Those are similar energies of a big fuck you, in a way, of like, I don't care about the consequences of my identification with, it's the right mostly these days, but it was the left previously. You may think that that's disgusting or primitive or whatever, but we are going to espouse it nevertheless, because we're so discontent, right? So it's discontentment that is driving that, is my sense. But I don't know, maybe there are other things. Elske, you started speaking of this, the Wende as being, as I heard you, kind of hijacked towards reunification, to kind of the West Germans saying, well, it's not really two parts coming together half-half, but you have to become like us. Like, that's the project. So in a way, you just become like us and integrate, and then everything will be fine. And maybe there's some, again, I don't know what we could call that, resentment that's born out of that, being pulled into that tunnel, and then being constantly kind of even policed, whether you're really integrating and doing your job of becoming, this new German, or whether you're not delivering on that. So maybe those energies have been kind of stifled by the so-called democratic political regime, and maybe the right is using these energies today.
This is the real political failure, I would say, in a sense, is that there is this discontent has not been picked up on by left of the center forces, because it had, I think, a lot of people's grievances have the potential to point at things that need solutions, and they also point at a sort of potential of protest, and it took the form of protest, like I said, in the early 90s, that were by no means right-wing protests, but both the revolution of '89 and the discontent and the frustration and the trauma that happened afterwards have been ignored by the political mainstream, and unfortunately also the political left, which is quite shocking and sad. If you talk about the political mainstream, the main problem was that the media, because of the specific German situation of the unification, which was different from Hungary, for example, you had an existing elite sort of in the media, but also in politics and in institutions, and it just expanded from West Germany. So there was literally no forum where East Germans could communicate about, for example, questions like, how do we deal with this fact that we were part of this kind of undemocratic, dictatorial, and often violent and repressive system. These questions, hard questions, were never addressed and never discussed, because the public space, in the sense of a sort of media space or theatres or whatever, was largely taken over by West German actors who had no sensitivity to these issues. So there was no space to deal with these things. And as regards the revolution, the whole narrative of the revolution being incomplete or having been cut short wasn't given a space either. So in 2019, the AfD could go around and put up billboards saying "Vollende die Wende," complete the revolution, which should have been a left-wing project, but it's been taken over by the right as a talking point. And for me, that was both shocking and interesting, because I'd been going around saying there is something left over from that experience of the revolution that sits in people's bodies, and that was an emancipatory project that was cut short and that was incomplete, and why are we not talking about this? And then it takes the right wing to come and talk to people and say, we see this, we hear this, and we're giving it space. And that for me is the real tragedy of the specific German take on the right-wing drift, which we obviously see in other countries and in West Germany as well. But there are these aspects to it that I think are kind of homemade and specific to the East German context.
Right. So I'm looking at you, Anna, and then then you fire away. But this reminds me of your performances, because there is kind of an undigested something that can't come out from the body and that can't be verbalized, that gets stuck in the system, so to speak. And your performances are exactly trying to give voice to that.
And yours too, Elske. The gestures, right? I mean,
we can talk about that, but I would like to hear from Anna, because it's true that we both work with the body very much, and I think that's an interesting connection between the projects. But I would like to hear from Anna first.
So maybe Anna go first, and then
Elske
say a bit about those gestures.
Yeah, now also I read some articles who say that the problem of the AfD and the right-wing uprising is that they are emotionalizing some problems. And I think this is a wrong analysis. Why do we not take emotions and physical effects as political? So, and I think maybe in Eastern Germany some emotions or physical gestures were oppressed or some in the last 30 or 35 years, or also there was this thing, don't do that, you have to do it like that, or you have to do it like that. When I was moving from Eastern Germany to Western Germany, where I was studying, my mother told me, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. Do not put on the washing machine in the evening, because in Western Germany they do not wash in the evening. Something like that. Or people, I really try not to speak in another way. When I was at Western Germany in university, I really tried to hide my Eastern German dialect. And these are just two small examples. So I think, we have history in our bodies, and we have social conditions in our bodies. And I think the only thing we can do is to, do research and to work with our bodies and with the effects that we have inside us. So because these are we are like containers of history and social conditions, and and I think this is the only way we could work through to digest what happened. So this is what I'm thinking about, and because maybe there are also some in Eastern Germany some beasts or something with whom we have to work on, because you have to imagine it's really a tragedy that society has no instruments of bring people together and make them talking about such big transformations that happened in Germany. And it's also, I would agree to what Elske says, is such a big tragedy that also left-wing movements in Western Germany had no big interest to see the strikes, for example, or to see this radical democracy moments in Eastern Germany. So,
but I have a question then. Like Linke, the left party, obviously, they were actually quite strong in eastern states, provinces for quite a long time. But in the past 5-6 years, even the left party is not gaining any votes anymore. So, there is the 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐞𝐝, Bündnis 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐞𝐝 that we can talk about. But why is it that even those leftists, many of them are from the East, and many of them had and still have some footing in these places, are bleeding all these votes, all this support, basically?
I think because also the left-wing party didn't have any instrument to take bodies and emotions as political area or as a political battlefield. Like in 2019, I was shocked when I was, for the last elections, in Brandenburg, there were posters where it was written, angriness is not a good political feeling, from the Partei Die Linke. And I was just shocked, because I was wondering, why do you give this strong emotions to the right now? Because there are so many aspects why Eastern German people are angry. So why are you doing that? So I think it's a problem of the political left in Germany, that they really don't want to have to do anything with emotions or with bodies. So this would be my answer. But I don't know what do you think, and what is your interest in physical in the physical approach of physical research?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that, I mean, a materialist analysis is important, but it's not enough when it comes to these sort of affective reactions. I mean, I work with the body for the same reason, that I find certain things are almost impossible to address in the vocabularies that we have for them today, especially about the revolution, because it was cut short. And so whatever new political practices, and there were many, and political ideas were taking shape in the revolution, never reached a stage where they were actually formulated into a new political language or a new political vocabulary. So that's why I also work with this word vocabulary of gestures, which is the previous project. Now it's called Archive of Gestures, but it's essentially the same project. And the starting point of that was very personal. It was just this experience that I had of this very powerful, formative political experience that shaped my life, of this revolution, of this enfranchisement, which I talked about earlier. And then the lack of language for it. And then when I started interviewing people about this, when I started working on this in 2007, 8, 9, I noticed that this is true for lots of people, even people that are critical of the official narrative of the unification or of the revolution as unification. There is a kind of almost self-belittling attitude to one's own political hopes in 89-90. So protagonists, I heard this again recently, people will say, yeah, we were naive to think that these dreams we had could be realized. And what I noticed when people make these statements that are really kind of like closing down a certain experience, their bodies don't cooperate. Their bodies get excited, and they get happy, and they get angry, and they're animated. And this for me was a starting point to think about working with the body as a historical archive. And the other reason that I work with gestures is also like a kind of almost anecdotal one, which is that when I was starting to work with this material from 89, in 2011, then the Arab Spring happened, and I suddenly had this experience, and Erdem, we had conversations about this after the 𝐒𝐥𝐬𝐞𝐴 pact that there were certain things that kept repeating themselves in these different revolutions, in these hugely different, vastly different geographical and historical contexts. And so the gestures that I work with function both as a way of sort of relating embodied knowledge and language, but also as a way of connecting different historical experiences of revolutions. For example, just to make it sort of more to illustrate a bit what I mean, it's like maybe the gesture of circling.
Yeah, I love your work, the circling.
I work with a video that I shot in Cairo in 2012. So at let's say one of the end points, one can debate when the revolution, the Arab Spring ended in Egypt, but it was after a big bout of protests. We were circling around Tahrir Square, and so I've played in my work a lot with this gesture of circling as revolution, revolving as a circling, but also this fact that you sort of revolve and then you do a big circling and then you feel that you've come back to the beginning, which is also something that people tell after all these all this revolutionary experiences, like, well, we've experienced this crazy thing, but we feel that we're back at square one. And then the spring takes this into three-dimensionality, so you suddenly have a distance between the starting point and the end point, and there is a stored energy, like literally a physical energy in between the 2 points, if you think of it as a spring. So I play with these kind of figures of circling, and then circling is also spinning, the body spinning out of control, and this sort of idea of losing the social coordinates. So it's very rich in a way that it allows me to actually sort of try to verbalize, or not even sometimes I perform, so it's not all that it sort of translates into the verbal, but a way of sort of reworking specific historical experiences in a way that's, on the one hand, historically specific and grounded in my own biography, but also universal in the sense of looking at resonances, let's say, between historical instances and how they play out.
But if we take this discussion to the political level and look at the far right and the left, it seems to me, based on what you're saying, that the right is just so much better at doing this circling in its own way, right? Like what you said, promising to finish the project of the Wende, of the regime change, whereas the left, it seems to me, is only really playing on nostalgia, but doesn't really have a vision for the future to offer, whereas the right is saying, look, there's a new beginning here that's possible. And the roots of that new beginning are in, as always on the right, in kind of German history, the body of the German nation as a space of renewal. So going back and cutting off the foreign kind of elements on the body, I see that very much so, and I don't see that promise of a new beginning in either the Linkes, so the left-wing parties project, which is, as Erdem said, is kind of dying now, or this new formation, this left conservative formation of Sarah Wagenknecht, which is very new and is kind of promising to hold German society together with more solidarity, but really not wanting any immigrants to come and wanting those who are here to become good Germans. I mean, I'm simplifying, but it's another project that plays, but these are nostalgic. Do you agree, or do you see this difference between right and left? And we can go to the street. We can go back to the street. Like Anna, you mentioned that, you know, in which was it? It was in Gera that the right is present, or I'm sure in Saxony you also saw the presence of the right. So how do you perceive the right when you meet its protagonists?
Yeah, what I realized this year and what was really strong, but maybe it's also logic, but I think in West, but also in Eastern Germany, we really have a lack also of dealing with this Nazi crime and their traces, for example, in our own families. And I often or nearly every time come back to this Nazi past of the German Nazi past in my works, also with 𝐂𝐥𝐬𝐞𝐳,
which is the theater group, right?
Yeah, which is our theater group, and I realized this year because I was talking to so many people that often there was comes out a really a language, National Socialist language. You know, this was really strong. For example, this word of people are asocial, like asozial. And I realized such a strong fetish on work and labor, like that everything is based on work and labor. I don't know, it would be interesting to make a research how is this experience in other East European countries, because in Eastern Germany I have such a strong focus or fetish on work.
We talked about this in the last episode in the context
very
of Hungary.
Yeah, exactly. Then I was thinking, oh yeah, this is interesting because it's the same, and for my point of view, it's the same in Eastern Germany. That's such a strong focus on that. Yeah, but of course the GDR was based on work. This is the first article of the GDR constitution. So that and. And the AfD addresses the worries of people. But
the AfD being, we need to say it at this point, the Alternative for Germany, which is the far-right party, main far-right party.
So we live in a very complex world under capitalist domination, and the AfD answers very complex and they give very easy answers to the what people are deserving, and they address these worries. And I would say the problem of the left is, which is quite connected to the lack of taking emotions and physical reactions as a political battlefield, the lack of the left is that they don't have good concepts of care. Like we have to really focus, I think, on how to care and how can we create maybe also new modes of caring in society, which is not caring in an authoritarian way. I think would be really interesting, because in Eastern Germany I often feel also that people deserve someone who tells them what to do or how to do something, And I think it would be interesting in a utopian or in a future society to find other modes of caring collectively and not delegate this care to a state or to a authoritarian party or something.
I think, these languages are being hashed out. I think, especially if you think about feminist and queer scenes and the kind of collectivities that are doing this, practicing this. What I think is needed, and there the revolution of '89 is for me always the starting point of thinking this, is to take this out of the small group, out of the bubble. Because I think we're starting to formulate vocabularies, but they need to be shared and they need to be taken out of Berlin and into different spaces. And they need to, that's why I love what you do, that you make yourself vulnerable by venturing out of the safe spaces, and you put yourself physically out there in the big square, and you stand there with your body, and you sort of make yourself a vessel of certain conversations, and it is a form of care. And I think for all four of us, I think what we probably share, that we have access to certain experiences and vocabularies of care that have been developed in our left-wing and queer feminist context. But I think for my work, at least, I feel a strong urge to take this vocabulary out of the bubble of Berlin, where it's very easy to feel very comfortable in this. But this is just to say that I think the vocabularies are being hashed out, and they're probably being hashed out in Gera and Jena and Halle as well. In maybe in ways that are not so easily recognizable to a traditional contemporary left. By traditional, I mean kind of a left that stays within its own concerns and languages. And I think that's sort of the task, really, is to build these kind of practices and expand them beyond the immediate comfort zone.
Yeah, that's true.
So we're going to try to kind of summarize what we learned today. This is kind of the way we do it. So one of the things that for me was the strongest experience from this discussion, my takeaway, like going back to Anna's work, on the body and your work with the diaphragm in the voice, is that there is repressed kind of emotions and experiences that could not be really spoken and heard at the same time after the regime change, after the Wende, and that these energies, when they can't be expressed, still have an enormous power, and they stayed there waiting to come out in different forms, and that can take even 35 years to come out, and then it takes very many different directions. And I think but go ahead, Erdem.
No, just in relation to that, one striking point that Elske made is that, the experience of 89, 90 as a revolution, as this, sense of enfranchisement, this sense of, self-control, management, creativity, all these things that we also know from the Gezi Park uprising and the Arab revolutions and everything. These have been completely ignored, completely glossed over by mainstream media, by the mainstream institutions for such a long time. And Anna was also adding that, the sort of the affective responses of East Germans after reunification were also ignored by not only mainstream political parties, but even those kind of left projects or some of the left political parties. So I think both of these things are very important for how a community is kind of constructed as a political community in the present.
Right.
And basically the AfD is apparently better at capturing these intensities, these energies, these affects, these histories in quite destructive but unfortunately successful ways.
Yeah, but we should also say that it's a mistranslation, no? I mean, that's a point I make in the book that I'm working on, that is that the AfD is picking up on affects that have been left unaddressed by the mainstream and the political left, but they're also offering a completely fake or toxic answer to them, which is antithetical to the revolutionary spirit of maximal inclusion and openness. And instead, this is what the AfD is continuing, just to make that point, is not the Wende, it's actually the nationalistic project of unified Germany and taking that to the extreme of like we are the ethnic Germans and so on, and with all these, which is a complete perversion of the revolutionary idea of wir sind ein Volk, essentially.
And it's also a perversion of there's no answering to the questions of care, I would say, because they really, really hold on a level of fear and anxiety. So I think there's no progressive way of resolving something in a careful way and in a way of solidarity.
I don't know if it fits, but as we were discussing it with Kristóf today, I thought cruel optimism, this concept actually fits here. It was kind of coined by this late American thinker, Lauren Berlan. And cruel optimism basically describes a relation that exists when something that you desire is an obstacle for your flourishing. And I thought it kind of describes in certain ways the ways in which we explore the entanglements between the past and the present in this episode. We can think of this as how the desires attached to unification was some kind of, or became some kind of cruel optimism. And we can talk about it in the more contemporary times, basically, in the context of East Germany.
Cruel because it was hijacked and kind of didn't take the project seriously, or people's desires seriously, right? Just to add to that.
And cruel because it will hurt people. It hurt people and it will continue to hurt people in one way or another.
Right. So I think last word is, if we try to look at what we did here today, it's a very different narrative we were building to the classic, looking at the AfD through the lens of the immigration problem, so to speak. Right? I think just to say to our listeners that we deliberately didn't take that path because it's so well known. And obviously we could have brought it in different parts of this conversation, like in how public space has been transformed since there are newcomers who live in these cities mostly. And are visible there and have new lives, and how they're transforming social life. So there's a whole conversation to be had over that. So thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you so much. This episode was sponsored by the 𝐒𝐿𝐸𝐿 and was produced in cooperation with the 𝐒𝐥𝐬𝐤𝐞 research group on authoritarianism and counter strategies.
We would also like to thank podcaster Martin Fischer, who gave us really invaluable advice. Martin has a highly popular German language podcast called 𝐒𝐥𝐬𝐞𝐽𝐞, which deals with the history of the German Democratic Republic. We would really encourage you to have a listen. And finally, we would like to name the people who helped us actually make this episode. And they are Vera Jonas and Shai Levi, who are responsible for sound engineering and mastering, Polina Georgescu, who designed the logo, and Anna Szilágyi, who is our in-house comms expert, whose role is to help us move away from our academic time.